Being fat is a disgrace. Get lost, pig. Those harsh words were thrown by my son, the father of my grandchild. I question the nerve of someone who can say such things so casually to their own child. My grandchild looked down, staying silent and not responding. Though I couldn't see his face, there's no way he wasn't affected by it. I stepped forward to protect my grandchild. Then, I'll take him in. With those words, I left the smirking couple behind and walked away, holding my grandchild's hand. A month later, after discovering the true nature of my grandchild, the arrogant couple appeared before me, saying, "Let's go back together." My grandchild made a puzzled face for a moment, then scoffed at them, saying, "Huh? Who are you guys?" and turned away. My name is Hannah Harrison. I turn 81 this year. I was one of the rare cases of marrying for love back in the day, naturally opposed by our relatives, leading us to almost elope, holding hands and running away. We ended up living in a place where nobody knew us, navigating life without knowing left from right. Soon after, we were blessed with a child. Despite being in unfamiliar territory, the people around us were kind, and we enjoyed raising our child and our life together. When our son graduated from high school, he brought home a girlfriend, announcing their intent to marry. We clapped our hands in joy, welcoming her into the family. Shortly after they got married, my grandchild was born. They had hoped for a girl, but it wasn't to be, and a boy was born. Learning this, the couple once considered not having children at all, but were persuaded by the doctor to go through with the pregnancy. They even suggested that I raise the child since they didn't want him. I convinced them otherwise, and my grandchild grew up well despite their reluctance to parent. It seemed they had no interest in raising their child, forcing me to frequently check in on them. If I didn't, they would neglect to feed him or leave him alone while they went out, so I couldn't just stand by. Every time, I would scold them, but it seemed to have no effect. One day, I went to see my grandchild as usual and found him caught in the middle of a marital spat. "Enough already! This mess is because you don't take care of anything. What are you talking about? You don't do anything either. It's unfair to blame me alone." Pointing at my grandchild, who was sitting on the couch and shrinking into himself, the argument between my son and his wife grew more intense. It's been quite some time since my grandchild was born. He turned 22 this year but hasn't gone to college or done much of anything since graduating high school, stubbornly staying at home. To me, that's neither here nor there. What bothers me more is wasting what could be the fun years of his 20s just waiting silently every day for his parents' arguments to end, without a smile. Seriously, with a body shaped like a snowman, does he still need looking after? My son sneered, looking at my grandchild. His wife joined in with a smirk, also glancing at my grandchild. "Can't help it, can we? We're concerned about what the neighbors might say. Just because he's unemployed doesn't mean we can ignore him." My grandchild bit his lip harder, making his already small body shrink even more. Unable to stand their exchange any longer, I stepped between my son and his wife. "Enough, you two! John, how about going shopping with Grandma?" "No, I don't want to." I tried to offer my grandchild a lifeline, but he mumbled a soft reply and fled to his room as if escaping. Such an ungrateful son. My daughter-in-law muttered, snorting and watching him go. Then, as if their earlier argument was a lie, the couple mentioned having errands and left. I tidied up the untidy house while checking on my grandchild. From a young age, he wasn't looked after much and grew increasingly reclusive due to the constant sarcastic remarks from his parents. I worry about how he spends his days, so I occasionally come over to do some housekeeping and look after him in secret. As I vacuumed near my grandchild's room, I knocked on the door several times. "John, haven't you had lunch yet? I made some lunch. Would you like some?" He usually avoids leaving his room, especially when his parents are home. Sneaking out to buy fast food when they're asleep or out. Years of eating fast foods have caused his weight to skyrocket. It breaks my heart to see him like this, so I always bring a homemade lunch when I visit, hoping it's more nutritious. After a pause, the door cracked open. My grandchild peeked out to see me. "I'll eat here." "Grandma, eat with me." After saying that, the door was closed with a snap, but I put away the vacuum cleaner with a content feeling and started preparing lunch. When I knocked on my grandson's room again with the lunch in hand, this time the door was promptly opened, and I was invited in. The room smelled slightly of grease. However, it wasn't unpleasant enough to bother me, so I just spread out the lunch on a small table without a care. My grandson's face lit up a bit as he watched the lunch being laid out. It's really heartwarming to see expressions he only shows to me. I divided the food onto a plate and offered it to him, and he said thank you in a soft voice. While we were finishing lunch and chatting about trivial things, it seemed like my son had come back home, as the entrance became noisy. Hearing that noise, my grandson immediately lost his smile and became silent. It looked like our pleasant time was over.
Hey, Mom! Don't leave trash at the entrance!
My son yelled loud enough to be heard through the door. He complains about the stuff I leave to take home, even though they don't properly take out the trash themselves. Feeling sorry for my grandson, I decided it was time to head home. He complains about the stuff I leave to take home, even though they don't properly take out the trash themselves. Feeling sorry for my grandson, I decided it was time to head home. I waved back and left the room. Still hearing my son yelling, I shouted back, "Be quiet," and started getting ready to leave.
You should take better care of your son, John. He's your child, after all.
Shut up. If he was a girl, I would.
What's wrong with having a boy?
Can't dress him in cute clothes and show him off.
Really, what kind of reasoning is that?
I spat out and grabbed the trash bag, then left my son and daughter-in-law's house. Walking a bit and looking back, I saw my grandson watching me from a second-floor window. He noticed me and waved again, and I waved back before heading home. It had been a while since I last visited because I was busy, but I decided to go to my son's house again. As I approached the entrance, I could hear my son and his wife arguing, the noise carrying outside. Sighing, I opened the door.
You know, keeping your hair long and covering your face doesn't change the fact you're overweight. Being overweight is a disgrace. Get lost, pig. Being a shut-in who does nothing but trouble, just get out already.
When I asked what was going on today, as my son and his wife were yelling more than usual, they both pointed at my grandson.
He's started talking back to us. After all we've done raising him, he repays us with defiance.
I was taken aback by my son's claim of defiance and turned to look at my grandson. He glanced at me but quickly glared back at my son and his wife. Despite being talked down to like this, my grandson had never talked back before. Yet, this time, he stood his ground firmly, not willing to back down. I was so surprised by his stance that I just stared at him with my mouth open.
You don't work, but you're always relying on our money. If you have time to spend money on your pointless hobbies, why don't you go back to school? Yeah, we're fed up with you eating into the money we earn. If you're going to continue to be a burden, then please leave.
My grandson, being told to leave by his parents and having no job or place to go, probably wanted nothing more than to leave this house. But he couldn't, and he couldn't even argue back. He just glared at them, biting his lip. You can't do it, can you?
Of course, you've always relied on our money.
My grandson clenched his fists in frustration. He looked like he was on the verge of exploding with anger.
Then, John will be living with me.
My statement brought silence. My son and his wife stopped yelling, and my grandson stared at me in shock. I addressed the three of them clearly.
I can't believe you'd tell your own child to leave. I wanted to do this sooner but didn't interfere, thinking it was better for him to be with his family. But I can't stand to see my dear grandson treated like this any longer. If he has nowhere to go, he can come to my house. John, pack your bags and come with me.
In my words, my grandson snapped out of it and ran to his room. My son and his wife, not expecting this turn of events but happy to be rid of the problem, didn't stop him, smirking instead. After a while, my grandson came out with his bags packed. I took some of his luggage and, ignoring my sneering son and daughter-in-law, left the house. My grandson followed behind me. And so, we started living together. My grandson followed behind me. And so, we started living together. My grandson was silent on the way to my house, but he held on to the lunch I gave him, following me closely. When we arrived at my house, my grandson, leaving his luggage somewhat aside, entered the living room holding only the lunch. From today on, he'll be living in this house, which I currently inhabit alone.
John, let's have lunch for now.
I called out to him while preparing dishes in the kitchen. My grandson, who had been aimlessly looking around the living room, nodded slightly and began to lay out the lunch on the kitchen table. After everything was ready, we put our hands together and said grace before eating, and John did the same. We finished our meal without much conversation, and I began to clean up. My grandson seemed unsure whether to help or not, but I gently declined his offer. "John, I'll give you any room you like on the second floor. Go see which one you'd prefer." My grandson, who rarely came out of his shell since he was little, hadn't visited our house much. It must feel almost like a new experience for him. After I finished cleaning up and sat down to drink coffee slowly, I could hear him exploring the second floor. His curiosity seemed to be flourishing. After a while, I heard him coming down the stairs. And then he peeked through the living room door with a small smile. "Grandma, I like the corner room." "All right, you can use it however you like." I nodded with a smile at my grandson's hesitant request. That room was once used as a study by my husband. It's empty now, but it once had a large desk and bookshelves. I'm glad my grandson likes the same room. He began to unpack his belongings in the room he chose right away. Wanting him to enjoy his free time, I decided to relax in the living room. As it got dark outside, I started preparing dinner. It had been quiet upstairs for a while. While cooking dinner, I thought about getting his new sleeping area ready and went upstairs to call him when dinner was ready. "John? Dinner's ready, come on down." My grandson was drawing. He must have been deeply engrossed in it. He had forgotten to turn on the light, and the room was dark. In the center of the room, a canvas displayed a large Gerbera daisy illuminated by a streetlight. Even without the bias of him being my grandson, it was a truly beautiful painting. The room had a stronger smell of oil paint than it did back at my son and his wife's place. John has a hobby of oil painting. "Grandma, this is for you." The canvas featured a large orange Gerbera daisy, with a background of clear blue sky and thin clouds floating by. Yet, it wasn't just that, the corners were tinged with the color of sunset, giving the impression that evening was approaching. It was a wonderfully nice painting. I knew of my grandson's hobby, but I had never actually seen his work. I was surprised by his talent upon seeing it for the first time. "You don't want it, right?" My grandson, seeing that I hadn't said anything, slumped his shoulders and sighed as he stood up. "It's a bit smelly from the paint. I'll open the window to ventilate, so you go ahead downstairs." "Are you sure I can have such a wonderful painting?" "Yes." I approached the painting my grandson had made and looked at it intently. I couldn't help but cry. Embracing my flustered grandson, I thanked him repeatedly. That painting became my favorite. I hung it in the living room and spent every day admiring it. Initially, John was embarrassed and shy about it, but as I kept praising him, he gradually started to smile happily. He said he had never been praised before, but my enthusiastic compliments seemed to inspire him to create more. As he finished each one, I praised and displayed them, and eventually, our living room turned into a gallery of his works. As I was sipping coffee in the living room and admiring them, a voice came from the garden. "You have a lovely home. Do you like paintings?" Turning towards the voice, there was a man. It seemed he was interested in John's paintings visible from the garden. I replied, "I don't know about paintings in general, but I love my grandson's paintings. All of these were done by him. May I hear more about it?" "Yes, of course." I was thrilled that someone was interested in my grandson's paintings, so I hurried outside to chat with the man. Most of what I said turned into bragging, but the man listened intently, nodding along, which led to us talking for quite a while. Eventually, my grandson, who had gone out to buy art supplies, came back and had to interrupt us. I was so pleased that I introduced my grandson to the man and invited him to join us for dinner if he'd like. My grandson, who is shy, looked a bit reluctant, but the man nodded in agreement, so I welcomed him into our home. A month after that incident, my grandson was preparing for his own art exhibition. It turns out the man who approached us in the yard owned an art gallery and had become interested after seeing me looking at my grandson's paintings. He found it curious how happily I gazed at the walls of the room, adorned with numerous paintings. Attracted by the artwork, he expressed a desire to learn more about it. Before we knew it, arrangements were made, and today, my grandson's exhibition was finally opening. The man even reached out to television stations, and a local news program came to cover the event. My grandson was very shy with all the attention but seemed pleased to be praised by so many people. The exhibition was a huge success and boosted my grandson's confidence, leading him to create even more paintings. I thought we were set for a smooth sail from here on, but then an unexpected visitor showed up. One day, someone visited our house. Thinking it was about time for a visit, I went to answer the door without checking who it was, only to find my son and his wife standing there. Looking down at me with smirks, I felt nothing but disgust towards them.
Mom, it's been a while. We thought it might be getting tough for you to take care of John, so we've come to take him back.
Sorry for the trouble. He can be quite a handful, can't he? Their insincere tone was obvious, and I was speechless. While I stood there dumbfounded, my grandson came down from the second floor and spoke to me.
Grandma, is it that time already?
My grandson, who had been working on his art late into the night, yawned as he headed towards the living room. However, upon noticing my son and his wife, he made a puzzled face, quickly walked towards me, and positioned himself between us and his parents. Seeing this, my son and his wife looked surprised.
John, have you lost weight?
Not dramatically, but yeah,
you've slimmed down.
Indeed, my grandson had lost some weight since moving in with me. The poor diet and unhealthy lifestyle he had led to weight gain, but since living with me and focusing on his art, he stopped snacking and ate balanced meals, gradually becoming healthier. And though my grandson tries to hide it, I know he sneaks out to run in the middle of the night. Since leaving his parents' house, he's started to make an effort. It's as if he's reaching for something he's never had before. And now, with what face have they come here? My son and his wife, still smirking as usual, finally broached the inevitable topic.
You must be tired of living here by now. You can come back to us if you want. We thought you'd want to live as a family of 3 again, so we came to pick you up.
We'll buy you all the art supplies you need, you don't have to stay here anymore. Let's go back together, shall we? Did they really think he would accept their offer after ridiculing his interests? After treating him poorly just because he wasn't the daughter they wanted? Despite the awful things they've said and essentially kicking him out, now that he's found success away from them, they decide it's time to welcome him back. The audacity was boiling my blood. My grandson, likely feeling the same, clenched his fists, glaring at them the entire time. Just as I began to worry it might turn into a physical altercation, he relaxed his shoulders, unclenched his fists, crossed his arms, and scoffed at them.
Huh? Who are you guys?
We were all taken aback by his response. My son and his wife looked at each other.
Seriously? After kicking me out just because I wasn't a girl, and now you come back just because I appeared on TV? Really shows what kind of people you are.
Mimicking my son and his wife's insincere laughter, my grandson let loose, giving them a piece of his mind. Having been subjected to their sarcasm since he could remember, he knew exactly what to throw back at them. He didn't stop until he had said everything he could think of, then heaved a big sigh.
That's the deal. I'm not going back, and I don't want to.
As my grandson made his stance clear, my son and his wife, their faces turning red with anger, were about to explode when a familiar voice intervened.
I'd like to hear more about this story.
Turning around, they saw the man who had helped with my grandson's exhibition. Followed by reporters scheduled for today's magazine interview. They all pointed their voice recorders our way, having recorded the entire exchange. Seeing the reporters' involvement, my son and his wife tried to flee with their faces contorted. However, the reporters and neighbors who had crowded the entrance wouldn't let them, and in the end, they couldn't escape. They were forced to watch as we proceeded with the interviews. A few days later, the incident made the news and was featured in a magazine article of considerable size. We arranged for a lawyer, a restraining order was issued against my son and his wife. They've been troubled by daily reprimands over the phone and cold looks from the neighbors. Now, they can no longer approach my grandson. It's their punishment for trying to manipulate him for their own convenience. My grandson has continued his art and diet as if nothing had happened. It seems like lifting the emotional burden has inspired him to face everything more positively. As for me, I've received several paintings from my grandson since then and even gave an interview about discovering his talent. Now, I'm leisurely sipping coffee while watching a documentary featuring my grandson. Occasionally, I can't help but smile as I gaze at the Gerber painting in the living room, which stands out among the rest. The man asked me to sell him the painting, but that's one request I cannot fulfill. It's a precious treasure my grandson gave me for the first time.